so much of law is being done the way it was really 100 years ago. And so sometimes I think people say, like, some of these changes, well, they've done that in other verticals, so it's not necessarily innovation. I think that's incorrect. I think that anything you can do in your particular vertical where you can make an improvement, well, that's an innovation you're bringing to your vertical. And we need people to think that way, to bring these changes into the legal industry to improve service delivery across the board.
Today on Law Next, indexing innovation, teaching innovation. How do we measure and track innovation in law? Law professor Dan Linna has set about to do a lot of these things, especially through his Legal Services Innovation Index, where he's tracking innovation among law firms and law schools. In today's show, we're going to talk with Dan about his index, about his academic and scholarly work.
We'll get to today's interview in just a moment. But first, let's hear from the sponsors who generously support Law Next. And now, on to this week's interview.
Dan Linna, welcome to Law Next.
Thank you, Bob. Happy to be here.
Very happy to have you and good to talk to you. So you are about to begin a visiting professorship, as I understand it, at Northwestern University's Pritzker School of Law. I got that much right?
Yes, yeah. Yes, I'm here in Chicago, and I actually started officially as of July 1st. And so I've been meeting with lots of folks here and getting ready for this upcoming year.
And you've been an adjunct professor at Michigan State University Law School, where you led the innovation research program there. I want to talk a lot about innovation and about what your work you're doing on this area, but why don't we start by having you tell me a little bit about your own background and how you got up to this point?
Yeah, sure. It's interesting because I'd always wanted to go to law school. I thought I'd go to law school. But when I graduated, I went to the University of Michigan. I started out working in information technology. And I'd always kind of been interested in computers and been learning to program and build websites and things like that. And I started off doing some work like that, ended up being the information technology manager for a group of companies in Michigan. And did a lot of stuff there, automating business processes, doing stuff, building relational databases and SQL Server in the back end, doing some front end programming and Visual Basic and Java, things like that. It was really a great experience. I loved what I was doing, but I'd always had this dream of going to law school. And so that's what I did. I ended up, I left that career. I went to law school. And, while I was working in IT, I'd actually gotten a master's of public policy and administration and had some training in econometrics, and which really gave me this kind of data-driven approach to problem solving and then working in business. And it was kind of interesting because I kind of got to law and I felt like, okay, well, we don't really use data. We don't really use technology. And who was I to question that? And after Michigan, actually, I worked for a Court of Appeals judge. I was a law clerk for a year there, but then I started at Honigman in Detroit. And Dan Katz and I were good friends. We went to the University of Michigan Law School together, and it was interesting. We had a lot of different conversations while I was practicing, and he was getting his PhD and doing more and more work in this space, and started seeing more and more of the opportunities to use data, to use process improvement, project management, use technology to improve the delivery of legal services. And so I had started, I was an adjunct law professor at the University of Michigan. I was teaching negotiation there. And then I started teaching as an adjunct at Michigan State in their Reinvent Law program and teaching about innovation generally, but using process improvement, project management, data, technology to improve legal service delivery. And so I actually became an equity partner at Honigman, and I wasn't really looking to do something else, but this opportunity came up to join Michigan State. And I was doing stuff first of all, as a dean of career services and also teaching. I was a professor of law in residence there after I'd been an adjunct professor, and then eventually became the director of legal R&D, that program that we launched there. So that's my background. It's turned out that it was kind of interesting because when I was working in IT, there was a part of me that was a little bit worried that I was kind of building up these skills that were not going to be useful to me in the practice of law, but now looking back, it's like, wow, okay. I look at the stuff I was doing in this business, in this group of businesses in the late 90s and early 2000s, and I say, wow, a lot of what I was doing then is stuff that we need to do in law today, of, using data, better project management, figuring out ways to use technology. So it's turned out that it was a pretty good training ground for the things that I'm doing today.
Yeah, little did you know. And legal R&D was the Center for Legal Services Innovation, I think is like the full name of it, right? At Michigan State. One of the projects that you've done that really interested me was your work on the Legal Services Innovation Index, and it raises kind of the interesting question. We talk so much about innovation in law. Especially over the last couple of years, it's become the buzzword of the day. Everybody talks about it, but I don't know that we've done a very good job of defining what innovation really means or what it looks like, and of how to monitor or index the extent to which it's actually occurring in the legal profession. And it seems to me that that's kind of what you're starting to do here. You were inspired by Jim Sandman, who's the president of Legal Services Corporation, to launch this project. I want to talk a lot about it. I don't even know where to start, but maybe we can start with what Jim Sandman was talking about and how that kind of inspired you to start thinking about this.
Yeah, well, this first came up when I saw Jim speak at the 2016 Codex Future Law Conference, and he presented 10 different ways in which that we could move the legal industry forward to improve access to legal services. And one of the things he talked about was to stop rating law firms just on revenue and profit, and to start ranking them on technology adoption is what he talked about. And I remember sitting there and thinking, wow, that's a great idea. And someone is going to jump on this and do something with it. But yet a year later, I was back at the Codex Future Law Conference, and Jim was on another panel then, and he had given the keynote in 2016, and he was on a panel in 2017, and he was still talking about these same things. And really, folks really hadn't done much with his suggestions. And I was sitting in the audience, and I thought, well, I'm going to do something with this. And I really thought about the way that we were teaching innovation at Michigan State, about lean startup and the improvement kata, and tackling these big challenging problems, and instead of letting the perfect be the enemy of the good, thinking about how can I prototype this, how can I come up with an idea on how to tackle this, and get a first version of that out there so people could comment on it. And that was really the impetus for it. So I went back to Michigan State and I started thinking about how could I kind of capitalize on what Jim was talking about, having some sort of a measurement of innovation. Right? It's less a ranking, at least especially in its current version, than just saying, let's try to measure who's doing what. Because I think one of the problems that we have is this discussion about, some folks say, well, gee, there's a lot happening. The whole industry's changing. And then all it takes is for someone to throw kind of a wet blanket on that and say, well, no, nothing's really happening. It's still same old, same old. Okay, well, where does that leave us? And I think that's why we need to start. That's one of the reasons why we need to start trying to define what is innovation and start measuring it across the whole legal ecosystem, across the legal industry.
So how do you even start with that? How do you begin to define what constitutes innovation in law?
Yeah, well, first of all, I guess I'll say my hypothesis here really is that I would put innovation in a couple of different buckets. One part of it is really just continuous improvement and kind of a focus on continuing to provide greater value to our customers, clients, society generally. And then I think the other path of it is, something that maybe is more like the research and development, thinking about new technologies. How can those be adopted? How are things really going to change in the future? And if you think about that first part of the problem, so much of law is being done the way it was really 100 years ago. And so sometimes I think people say, like, some of these changes, well, they've done that in other verticals, so it's not necessarily innovation. I think that's incorrect. I think that anything you can do in your particular vertical where you can make an improvement, well, that's an innovation you're bringing to your vertical. And we need people to think that way, to bring these changes into the legal industry to improve service delivery across the board. And then there's this other bucket in this kind of like digitization of the economy, which lots of people are struggling with those questions. And so in law, we shouldn't be surprised that it's difficult to think about how are we going to apply artificial intelligence, because every business vertical is grappling with that right now. But when you look at some of the other things about thinking about how do we apply process improvement and project management, how do we use metrics, how do we use data analytics to improve the delivery of legal services? Well, there's no excuse for not using those things in the legal industry. We've seen those in other verticals for a long time now, so we need to start applying those. So I think that's the first part of it, is just defining it that way, and then going out and start trying to figure out, well, okay, so how would we measure it once we start with a working definition of innovation?
So I know that you talk a lot about these sort of three prongs of innovation. I think about people, process, and technology. And you published an article last year, a law review article in, I think it was in, the Michigan Bar Journal, I believe, leveraging technology to improve legal services, where you talk about kind of these three prongs, and you suggest that the legal industry has tended to focus on the people part of it, on lawyers delivering legal services, delivering legal advice, but hasn't focused as much on the process and technology parts of it. Is that where you see innovation most likely to be happening?
Yeah, I think so. But I also did in that article, I wanted it to also come through that I think there's are gains that need to be made on the people part of it as well. So we've focused as lawyers as the center of the universe. And even on the people part of it is thinking about, you don't necessarily need to be a lawyer to deliver a value in the legal services industry. There are other folks who can help people solve legal problems. There's ways others can contribute to delivering legal services. So that's one part of it on people. To me, it's also about
the legal profession has trouble hearing. But
yeah, I think that's right. And it manifests itself in a lot of different places and in a lot of different ways, right? This idea that only a lawyer can solve different problems, even some of the pushback against limited licensed legal technicians in Washington State, things like that, and saying, well, no one has to be a full-fledged lawyer to help people solve their problems. So that's part of it. And then the other part of it is just even inside of the fanciest law firms, respecting technologists, project managers, marketing people, data scientists, and looking for ways to integrate them into what we do. The other part of the people piece of this is just leadership and thinking about ways to improve our skills, even the listening skills, negotiation skills, right? The people component of it. But I think you're right. And what you're driving at is that process is an area where I think we've got severe deficiencies, and there's real opportunities to make a big difference on improving process. And I've actually been tending that people, process, technology certainly isn't something I invented. This has been said for a while. But also I've been trying to frame it more so even recently, people, process, data, technology, and just to try to kind of really emphasize the opportunities around being more data driven and capturing data about the things that we do as lawyers and the improvements that can be made just with simple metrics in that space. The process piece of it mostly being just thinking about what is it that we do to deliver solutions for clients in legal aid, even looking at the fanciest of law firms. Again, it's really pretty surprising when you go into big law firms and you find out that often you'll have lawyers doing the same task in many different ways. And there are a lot of problems with that, not just efficiency, which we tend to focus on efficiency, but you have quality problems when you have all this variance and tasks with no good reason for it. And it also makes it really difficult to think about how do you improve things. When you don't have standardization, when you don't have agreed upon best practices and standards for doing things, then you don't have a baseline for improvement.
We'll get back to my interviews in just a moment. But first, let's take a break to hear from the sponsors who generously support Law Next. And now, let's continue this week's interview.
So as you've, going back to the index, which I think I diverted us off of a little bit, but as you began to construct this index and began to try and look at how you could catalog innovation, index innovation at law firms, how did you do that? What was the methodology that you used to begin to do that?
Yeah, sure. So the first part was really just creating a catalog. So the two initial parts of this that I released were a catalog of innovations at law firms, and then an index of law firms. Then later on, I added a law school index. But the catalog was really just going out and looking at articles and books and some of the information that had been pulled together already about innovations in law firms. And then trying to curate that information, pull it together, and then just starting to try to make sense of it. What are the practice areas that were being affected? What were the technologies or disciplines being brought to bear? Was this about project management or process improvement? Was this about data analytics? Was it about applying artificial intelligence, document automation, for example? Ron Friedman had already done some great work in this space, and so that his was a resource that I used. Carla Swansberg, who was at Blake's at the time, provided me some research she'd been doing in the law firm to help seed this catalog, but then kind of like taking that information and taking the next step as far as categorizing it, organizing it, and analyzing it. And then from there, because what that really just gave us is kind of shines a light on what some of the law firms are doing, kind of asking the question, okay, based on what we're seeing and what we know about what we see evolving as far as innovation in the marketplace, how can I get a measure across the marketplace more generally? And so what I decided to do is, based on what I'd been learning and building the curriculum at Legal R&D at Michigan State, doing research on what other schools are doing, on what law firms are doing, and then based on the work in the catalog, identify 10 categories of innovation, and then let's look at 260 world-leading law firms. So let's look at the AmLaw 200, the Canadian Top 30, and the AmLaw Global 100. And assess them for their innovativeness. And now that's a daunting task. So what's going to be thinking of this lean thinking approach, right? The lean startup approach. How could I assess these firms? What would be an easy way to do that? Well, it turns out every major law firm has a website, and they talk about the things that they're doing. So my thought was, let me figure out some search terms in these 10 different categories of innovation. And I could scrape the websites and download them, but a first cut, an easy way to do it would be use Google Advanced Search and run these search terms across these 260 websites. So I put together a Google sheet, so I was able to kind of automate a little bit the generation of the search queries, but I couldn't automate the actual searches just because Google Advanced kind of checks in with you every once in a while to make sure you're not a robot. But so I ran these 2,600 searches, and this is where I had some students helping me as well, across those world-leading websites. And based on those search terms, we could kind of compare firms to each other and get a sense, trying to measure innovation. And I make it really clear on the website, this isn't a ranking, right? But it's a first look into trying to get a sense for, what are the things that, what are the things we should be looking for when we're looking for innovation? And so my hypothesis was these 10 categories. And what do we see when we look for search terms in these 10 categories across these 260 websites? And so that was the law firm index, part of the Legal Services Innovation Index.
And so it's not a ranking, but at the same time, I think you're fairly explicit about the fact that you hope that law firms and clients will look at this and perhaps, the clients will perhaps feel motivated to motivate their law firms a little bit on these areas, and that law firms will be more likely to themselves be motivated to be more innovative and more responsive to what their clients want from them. I mean, this is meant to be a prod of some sort.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I have to say that when I put this out there, I was a little bit sheepish about it. And I actually kind of was a little uncertain about putting it out there. I mean, I've just joined the academy from being a partner at a AmLaw 200 law firm. Kind of, the bread and butter of doing work in these big law firms is this kind of idea that when you put work product out there, it's A+ work product. And I was a little bit uncertain kind of about putting something I'm calling a minimum viable product out there. But, I thought it was interesting information, and I thought it was a contribution to the space, and that's how we move forward, right? That's the whole idea. That's how we generate knowledge. And so I thought, okay, I need to put this out there. And if other people can do better and build on it, and I want critique so I can keep improving it. But, and I do want people to use it to kind of start measuring themselves compared to other firms. And I've heard from quite a few law firms. I've heard from quite a few corporate legal departments. I've had some corporate legal departments tell me that they are going through convergence programs and doing other things to start trying to measure the performance of their law firms. And they're incorporating some of this information into what they're doing. I also want law schools to see this. And I want law students to see it. I want them to see like the ways in which law firms are innovating and how they're holding themselves out to their clients. So I think across the whole legal system, it's trying to, once you start measuring things, people respond to that, right? Now there are pros and cons to that, and some people have pointed it out to me, but I think this is positive, what can come away from this.
Well, I think it's very positive. You write in explaining your methodology, and this is a quote from you. You say, "My hope is that clients, including legal departments, will consult this index and engage in deep discussions with their lawyers about how to improve legal service delivery." There's a feeling, I think, among many who are kind of pushing for innovation and change in the legal profession that a lot of the motivation for that change is going to come from the clients, that law firms are reluctant to adopt innovations, are reluctant to change their business models or to change the way they use technology, and that it's going to be that kind of push from clients that's going to make that happen. You seem to be suggesting that there when you say that the clients will engage in deep discussions with their lawyers.
Yeah, well, I think that's what we're seeing, and I think clients need to continue to push the envelope. I bring this up when I talk about law schools as well. I mean, Who are the customers of law schools? It's students and employers, and students and employers should be pushing law schools. Clients should be pushing law firms. At the same time, I'm giving a talk at ILTA on large law firm CIOs, and I've been doing some work with ALM on their strategic legal tech forum in October, and then their track for Legal Week. And I think there's a real opportunity here, and some law firms are engaging with this and really trying to capitalize on this, but a real opportunity for law firms to look at this and say, gee, this isn't a race to the bottom, but there are real opportunities here for us. And, we can innovate, we can use these technologies, we can improve our processes, we can capture larger market share, we can figure out ways to, provide greater value. It really comes down to providing greater value to the client, right? If you're focused on providing greater value to the client, then a lot of other things start taking care of themselves.
I should say for our listeners that all of this is online at legaltechinnovation.com, and you can see the catalog. You can see the law firm innovation catalog, the law firm index, the law school index. You can see all of this broken down by categories and jurisdictions, and even on the index by individual firms. But I'm wondering, in your work on this, if you got a better sense in your own mind of what innovation looks like at a law firm. What makes for an innovative law firm?
Yeah, well, I think that this data and then the work that I've been doing, we've worked on some projects with corporate legal departments, with law firms, while I was at Michigan State, with courts as well. And I think that, we have to be careful about defining innovation as looking like any one particular thing. And, we're starting to see a little more differentiation across the marketplace, which I think is a good thing. We wouldn't want all law schools. We wouldn't want all law firms to really look the same, and maybe they all look too much alike right now. That's perhaps part of the problem. I think when it really comes down to this, and I say this on the website, and one of the things that's a little bit difficult to measure in this kind of study that I did is, it's one thing to have an incubator or to enter into a partnership to test some legal technology tool. And those are good things. And I think it's great to see law firms doing that. But I think the organizations that are really committed to innovation are the ones that are empowering everyone in their organization and saying, we need to have a learning organization. And it can't just be a chief innovation officer and the CIO or the CEO and a couple of people in the organization who are innovating. We need to empower everyone in the organization to be thinking about continuously improving and delivering greater value to our customers. If you're in a corporate legal department, your customers are, in the business. If you're in the law firm, your customers are these clients in corporate legal departments. And so we need to have everyone inside of the organization thinking about that, right? Empowering. Too often, I think some of these, sometimes we think of innovation and focus on some of the things that are happening at higher levels of organizations. But if we're not empowering people internally who are closest to the customer to continuously improve and innovate, if we're not creating a learning organization, if we haven't grasped the idea that sometimes when you innovate, you fail, right? And I've tried to reframe that a little bit as instead of fail fast, kind of learn fast. We got to try our ideas. We can't jump to conclusions. We can't make assumptions. But, the organizations that can really change their culture and empower people inside the organization to continuously improve and innovate, I think those are going to be the organizations that really distinguish themselves as being able to sustain innovation and deliver greater value to their clients over the long haul.
So if I hear what you're saying, it's not simply a matter of whether you're using AI or thinking about blockchain or using alternative fee agreements. It's really more a matter of the culture within the firm that defines whether the firm is innovative or not.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think these items are proxies, right? If you have a law firm, and Bill Henderson wrote a great post about this when it came out. Oh, I'm a little bit biased because he said some nice things about the index. And one of the things he said is that that when he looked at it, it lined up with kind of his understanding of the marketplace as far as being consistent, facial validity to the study. And so some of the firms that have been seen as innovative, in fact, they are talking about and doing things with alternative fee agreements and looking at using analytics and artificial intelligence and have blockchain practice groups and things like that. So I'm not saying that there's no connection, but yes, I think that you could potentially be talking about these things, but not really doing them and not fostering the sort of internal culture in an organization that would result in sustainable innovation that really delivers results in the long haul.
Now, the Law School Innovation Index is a little bit different in terms of what it looks at. How are you looking at innovation in law schools? How are you trying to index which law schools are innovative in terms of what's the methodology you're using there?
Yeah, that one is where.
And that's a work in progress too, I understand.
Yes, yeah. So this is the prototype, and I think this is even more of a work in progress than the other one. And I need to note that what I did, first of all, is I looked at a lot of the popular press articles and kind of what I knew about the marketplace, and first looked at law schools that have been identified as being innovative. What are those law schools doing? But then I created kind of a framework. I had a hypothesis about, well, what is an innovative law school doing? And one of the distinctions I made here is some of the law schools that are identified as innovative are kind of doing law and technology classes and training, which no doubt that's useful and that's a meaningful contribution to the space, but that's not really necessarily all that different than what law schools have traditionally done, right? Something new comes along and we teach a law and class about it. Not enough schools are doing that, so I shouldn't give it too short a shrift. But where I said that I really would like to see schools focus on, and what I'm focusing on here, is legal service delivery disciplines. And so what are our law schools teaching? This upcoming year, I'm teaching two classes on side of this. One of them is law of artificial intelligence and robotics, but I'm also teaching an artificial intelligence and legal reasoning class. And so kind of my hypothesis here is that we need more innovation around getting lawyers to think about how do we innovate in our delivery of legal services. And so I came up with legal service delivery innovation disciplines and then looked at those 40 schools that have been identified as innovative and simply measured how many of these disciplines are they teaching. And then I looked at the law and technology classes like AI and law, cybersecurity, e-discovery, where they're mostly focused on teaching the law of those technologies as kind of supplementing that curriculum. And so that's what that information pulls together. And I've got a lot of great feedback for that. And my goal there is I want to get international schools on the index, and I want to get all of the U.S. and Canadian law schools on the Law School Innovation Index.
So how do you teach law students to be innovators or entrepreneurs?
Well, what we've done, have done at Michigan State is we had put together a curriculum around people, process, data, technology, right? And kind of getting them to engage in this inquiry about thinking about how can we improve legal service delivery? And there's no shortage of problems for us to work on. I mean, one of the things we're working on at Michigan State is thinking about, okay, we're part of a profession where, you can debate the numbers, but, whether it's 80% or 60%, 80% of the impoverished and half the middle class don't have access to legal services. And at least part of the problem is that we haven't worked on our business models. We haven't worked on improving the delivery of legal services. So just getting students to think about that. And we did that in the delivering legal services class, the entrepreneurial lawyering class, and some of the other classes at Michigan State, kind of culminating in my capstone class that we had this last semester, where we're working with Perkins Coie, Ackerman, Davis Wright Tremaine, and Michigan Legal Help, also have a legal aid organization in the mix. And we're building expert systems, and we're using ThinkSmart and Neotologic to do that. So it's kind of like building out in this idea of law schools as labs, working on real world problems and thinking about how to solve these problems, how to improve legal service delivery. And I think the other component of this is preparing law students to improve legal service delivery, and the Innovate also includes giving them and building up the problem solving skills that help them contribute to multidisciplinary teams that are focused on solving other bigger problems in society. So I think, a lot of it is simply exposing students to this and getting them to ask questions. And, the other piece of this about the Law School Innovation Index is that I would like to see students consulting this and before they choose a law school. And don't necessarily use my framework, just look at my framework for some information. But when you're talking to law schools, ask them, what are you doing to prepare me for the future? Because I think all of us would bet that the future of legal service delivery, the future of law practice is going to look different somewhere down the road. And, we can debate if that's 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years, but turns out students are in law school now, they're going to be in the middle of their careers in 20 years, right? So how are we preparing them for that? So I think that is a big part of it too, is just pushing law students to think about, why am I going to law school? And what is it I want to do? And how do I pick a law school that's going to prepare me for being as successful as possible in the future?
You've been an advocate for law firms to employ kind of lean thinking, lean methodology in their approaches to innovation. Is that true for law schools as well? Does that work in a law school context?
It's interesting because I think the short answer is there is tremendous value in teaching about these topics. I think there's a question about maybe necessarily how you introduce it in the curriculum. And, I think at Michigan State, we had a delivering legal services class that would introduce students to project management and process improvement, but also using metrics, using technology. So we had some training. We'd also do some workshops to supplement that. I think that, you look at what lawyers do, and of course, a lot of what we do as lawyers is we manage projects, right? We're project managers, and we follow processes to solve problems, and we should be using data more and more. So I think training students in those areas is important to their future success. And I think, one of the best experiences I had while I was at Honigman that wasn't involved with law practice, which I miss sometimes, I have to admit, like taking depositions and arguing motions, I miss that sometimes, but also working with my colleagues on developing a competency-based model for hiring and evaluating and training attorneys. And I think in the legal industry, we tend to kind of just think about evaluating people in terms of how smart they are, right? And we tend to think that it's all about the gray matter. And I think it turns out that there are a lot of other skills that go into being effective as a lawyer, and absolutely being good as a project manager and thinking about your processes. That contributes to being a good lawyer. So I think there are a lot of good reasons to think about making that part of the curriculum in some ways, even if it's just workshops and so on. And this class that I talked about where we develop products in Neotologic, we definitely did some teaching about the improvement kata and agile project management, lean thinking in that class. And our students had already had some exposure to these other disciplines. And the innovation lab that I'm going to be teaching here at Northwestern. I'll be co-teaching it with Dave Schwartz and with Chris Hammond, who Dave is a law professor here at Northwestern, and then Chris Hammond, who's a computer science professor at McCormick Engineering School. We're going to be doing similar type of projects with law students, Master of Science in Law students, and also engineering, computer science students. And absolutely, we'll incorporate a bit of training and process improvement, project management, because those when you're working, especially when you're working with a team of people, you need those skills to be effective.
So you're in Chicago now, as you said. You're starting at Northwestern University as a visiting professor of law. What's in addition to the innovation lab that you just talked about? What's ahead for you? What's on the agenda for the coming year?
Yeah, well, I'm really excited about the class I'm teaching this fall, the artificial intelligence and legal reasoning class. And Kevin Ashley, who's a law professor at the University of Pittsburgh, wrote a great book with that same title. I'll be using that this fall in that class. We'll be doing using a couple other resources. So I'm excited about that, kind of demystify artificial intelligence and get students thinking about how they can use it to deliver legal services. And then the law of artificial intelligence class in the spring. And then a class I'm really excited about is assessing artificial intelligence and computational technologies. And that's kind of connected to the research that I'm doing on assessing AI. So looking at the methodology for assessing the tools, stuff that if you're in e-discovery space, recall, precision and those sorts of measures, but just thinking about so that lawyers can better understand how to assess how these tools are created, what they can expect from them, and how they can utilize them in their business. So I'm doing research around that, but then these classes that I'm teaching, the one here in Northwestern is for Master of Science in Law students. But then I'm really excited that Northwestern has a San Francisco immersion program. And that I'm going to be teaching that same class for the San Francisco immersion program in February and March. So that's JD students and business school students, Kellogg Business School students who will be out in San Francisco. They're working in internships Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then they're taking classes on Thursday and Friday. So I'm really excited to teach that class out in San Francisco with that cohort of students. And I'm looking forward to working with people here to continue to do more research on just really assessing artificial intelligence. I think there's so much opportunity for lawyers to get engaged here, not just thinking about artificial intelligence for legal service delivery, which I think we need more lawyers doing stuff in that space. We need more technologists doing stuff in that space. But then also, our clients more and more are grappling with these issues. And there's huge opportunities for lawyers who understand the technology in a way, the technology and the business and the law around it in ways that we can provide greater value to our business clients and help to be more strategic partners to them as well.
Well, I wish I could sit in on your class on artificial intelligence and legal reasoning. That sounds like it's going to be a fascinating topic. It's funny, in some ways, I think a lot of lawyers think, there are a lot of lawyers who are afraid of artificial intelligence and who think it basically usurps, if I could only say the word, the need for legal reasoning, right? It's anything but that.
Getting lawyers to understand how these tools work, I think, is really important for a couple of reasons, because it helps us identify the opportunities to make great use of them. But then, it helps us recognize where these tools, especially in the short run, maybe aren't going to have as much of an impact and the things that we ought to be focusing on. But, it's, just some of the discussion. I'm glad there is more discussion about thinking about innovation and technology, but it's also frustrating sometimes to see it happening, right? And it's like these debates about innovation and regulation. And it's like, wow, look at the state of the profession right now, and look at how many people lack access, and look at the condition of rule of law. And, and there are people all around the world who are actually tackling this issue and starting to make progress on it. And, I wish we could advance the conversation past whether we need innovation or technology or not, to just recognizing the way the whole world is evolving and really committing to grappling and solving some of the problems. I mean, we've got so many platitudes about commitments to justice and improving access to legal services. Let's really let's commit to solving these problems. Let's move on to these low-level discussions about the need to innovate and improve the profession and get to doing the hard work of getting it done.
Well, I believe that the work that you're doing will help to advance that discussion, or at least thinking about those topics. You're going to continue to maintain the index, right? The innovation index.
Yeah. So I'm fortunate to be working with folks at Stanford as affiliated faculty there, and I'm really excited about that. And I've got some folks who are helping me with the index there. Thomson Reuters is going to support continuing to build this out and do some new things with it. So I'm really, really excited about that. I want to keep it available as a resource open. I don't want to have to put it behind a paywall. And I want to keep thinking about ways to improve it and to kind of measure what's going on in the industry.
Great. Well, Dan, I really appreciate your taking the time to talk to me today and to fill me in on what you're doing. And I greatly admire and respect what you've done with the Legal Tech Innovation Index. I've in a number of talks I've given, I've highlighted the work that you've done as a way of being able to demonstrate how innovation can happen and how we can track it and begin to index it, and how it can be used to motivate others to follow in the tracks of those who are adopting innovative methodologies. So good on you for doing that.
Well, thanks a lot, Bob. Yeah, I appreciate you writing about things like this and mentioning it in your talks. And so, really appreciate all the work that you're doing in this whole space.
Well, congratulations on your new position, and I wish you a good year, and thanks a lot for taking the time to be with you, and great to talk to you.
Sounds good. Yeah, thank you very much for having me, Bob.
All right, well, that does it for this episode of Law Next. If you like what you heard, please leave a review in Apple Podcasts, and be sure to subscribe to receive future episodes. This is Bob Ambrogi. Thanks for listening.